Sabah al khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed Al-Rimawi. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Australia's only radio program that is totally dedicated to the Palestinian cause in English language. Stay with us and enjoy the episode. Nasser and Robert, good morning.
Good morning, Yusuf and Robert.
Good morning, listeners. Now, how good is this that the three of us are back together?
The A-team is back. Beware Zionists, the A-team is back.
We're back, look out.
We are back. Well, it has been maybe a month or a little bit more since the three of us were in the studio, and it sounds like we have a few topics to talk about. Tell us, Nasser, what our topics are.
So we're going to do a fly round of a few things. Unfortunately, one of the realities of, our radio station, but also being a Palestinian, is we commemorate so many events. And we're going to commemorate the massacre in Deir Yassin in April 1948, so 70 years there. We're going to commemorate now 30 years since Abu Jihad Khalil Al-Wazir was assassinated in Tunisia. Palestine Prisoners Day. Also, we're going to speak about Gaza and about a famous Palestinian painter that we lost, Jumana El Husseini.
Yes, so we will start with the massacre, without which Israel wouldn't have been created. And I'm quoting Menachem Begin in his diaries, where he said, without Deir Yassin, Israel would not have been born. Now, what happened on the 9th of April 1948, Nasser?
Well, we know that the Zionists, at the time, they were terrorist organizations. We have to remember that Menachem Begin ended up being Prime Minister of the State of Israel, won a Nobel Peace Prize in 77 for
the Camp
David Accords. But, there was a wanted poster for this criminal issued by the Palestine police, the British Mandate of Palestine. On April 9, they surrounded Deir Yassin, and according to different accounts, somewhere between 100, but we believe well over 200 people were systematically executed, lined up against walls, women, children, elderly, and gunned down. And they left just enough alive. And they sent some north, some south, some east, some west, and said, tell them we're on our way.
Yep.
Tell your Palestinian friends, family,
what happened
relatives,
in Deir Yassin,
tell them what happened here
will happen to you.
We're on our way. And that barbarity, the evil Zionist, Irgun Lehi terrorist gangs, that fear then propelled and created the mass exodus that predates or created the Nakba, the catastrophe that was Palestine.
So that was the trigger point. Deir Yassin was the trigger point.
Absolutely.
It was a turning point in the Nakba events, because Nakba refers to events that happened from November 47
to
today, but the creation of Israel, I think the end of the warfare was when Israel and the Arab countries signed the armistice.
Yeah.
But the importance of Deir Yassin massacre was the location of the village. It is one of 5 villages that today refers to West Jerusalem. So West Jerusalem is a term that we started hearing about after 48, because Israelis wanted to make a presence in Jerusalem before 48. So there was 5 villages to the west of the ancient wall. You have Ain Karim, you have Deir Yassin, you have Al-Malha, you have Beit Mahsir, and also the 5th one I can't recall now. These 5 villages make the suburbs of today's West Jerusalem. We spoke to people from Deir Yassin a few days ago. They told us that a group of them and a group of Al-Malha village refugees went to the ruins and managed to do some singing and managed to commemorate their grandfathers, which means that, today's generation will never forget the legacy of this massacre. And we have to also say that Israel, after the creation, it's not that, before Nakba there was no state, there was Jewish gangs, and after 48, now that there was states, the massacres ended. No, Israel actually continued the massacres policy, and we have in the 50s the massacre of Qibya, the massacre of Kufr Qasim, in the 60s the massacre of As-Samu', in the 70s the massacres of Tal al-Za'tar, and the list goes on, the list goes on. And now only 2 weeks ago, targeting civilians, targeting protesters who came to the borders without weapons, and this is in line with the policy and ideology on which Israel was created.
Absolutely. So April 17, we know, is Palestine Prisoners Day, where Palestinians the world over remember those Palestinians that are in jail, that are under administrative detention, etc. The facts speak to the military nature of Zionism and just how awful it is. When you spread out the numbers and actually start calculating them, you start to really wonder what sort of mentality can do this to another human population. Since the occupation in 1967, since Israel took Gaza, East Jerusalem and the West Bank, there have been 800,000 Palestinian prisoners. That's 20% of the total population and 40% of the male population. 4 in 10 of every male since 1967. So you're a family of 10, 4 of your relatives have been in jail.
And 52,000 of those are administrative.
Yeah.
As well, which is, you're going to explain.
Well, I think administrative detention is where somebody is held without
trial,
or charge.
without anything, no reason at all. So basically,
they keep renewing it every 6 months perpetually.
So 52,000 administrative detentions. No trial. You don't get to see the evidence. You're held incommunicado. They won't tell anybody where you are, what's going on for months on end. These administrative detention orders get renewed. You never get to see the evidence as to what it is. And if you take the 52,000 since 1967, multiply them by 3 months, you end up with 15,000 years of jail time, where the person who's in jail has not seen the evidence that has been presented against them, yet a closed court has determined they need to stay in there. 15,000 years. I mean, 8,000 Palestinian children, these are under 18, 8,000 Palestinian children arrested since the year 2000. 200 Palestinians have died in Israeli jails from medical neglect. Medical neglect. That's where we know
which is systematic. Medical negligence is a systematic weapon that Israel is imposing on the Palestinian prisoners. And I recall Farah Bakir, the 16-year-old teenager who was taken to prison with a broken arm and was denied seeing a doctor for 8 months.
And the problem is
with a broken arm.
And the problem is none of these Palestinians have ever been given compensation once they've been let out and there's been no charges, and all of a sudden the Israelis say, hey, sorry. They don't even say sorry, but they'll let you out. They're not being held to account, which is something
not to mention the conviction rate.
The 99.9% conviction rate. Don't forget Michael Danby. Also, the systematic imprisonment of our press, of our legislators. So, Marwan Barghouti, Khalid Jarrad, Ahmed Saadat. These are members of the Palestinian National Council who have been democratically elected to represent their constituency.
The head of the parliament, Aziz Dweik from Hamas, was imprisoned for years also.
Yeah. I mean, it's sickening. And we shouldn't forget the parallels between the racist settler colonialist enterprise that is Israel and what happens here in Australia. The parallels between the incarceration rates for Palestinians and our indigenous people in Australia. If you look in Australia, between the incarceration rate, the illiteracy rate, the health rates, the life expectancy of our indigenous people, it speaks to the systematic abuse of a theoretically superior race over the indigenous inhabitants. And they can do it because they've othered us. And the otherness is an Aboriginal, the otherness is an Arab, the otherness is, hold on a second, Ahad Tamimi is in jeans with blonde hair and blue eyes. She's obviously a fake Palestinian being paid. I mean, and this is...
And just for people that don't know, this is actually something that some of the Israeli politicians actually thought. And she was a plant.
And they thought she was a plant and spent Israeli taxpayer money doing an investigation to see whether or not she was a real Palestinian.
How stupid is this? Yeah. I mean, it's enough to pay a visit to Palestine, to see the diversity in the Palestinian skin color. You will see, of course, the majority of us will be like the rest of Arabs, but you will see African Palestinians in Jericho and Jerusalem, and you will see European Palestinians or European-looking Palestinians.
We've got cousins, Yusuf. We've got cousins that are as red-headed as any Scottish.
My own grandmother was redhead.
Like a proper ginger.
So the diversity in the Palestinian society is something that you cannot miss. You cannot miss that. And I've seen, I'm sure, Robert, you've seen it. You've entered so many Palestinian homes. And it's not an issue, you know. We all are Palestinians, regardless of how degree of our skin color and regardless of our faith. And but it bothers the Israelis because someone like Ahad Tamimi, she broke the observable, stereotypical portrait of Palestinians in Western media because she looks like she looks like you. She looks like one of your daughters, and she looks like Europeans and Americans, and that itself is a threat.
The threat is, because you can't other a blonde person. You can't other Rachel Corey. You can't other that.
Yeah, it's true. That's what you're saying. Absolutely.
Also, on the issue of Palestinian prisoners, we have to also understand that when Israel takes a prisoner captive, a member of a family of 5 or 6, it's actually not only it is taking the guy or the girl captive, it's holding the whole family hostage, because the whole lives of the members of this person changed,
of course,
from the moment this person is imprisoned. And maybe one of the advantages of Facebook, let's say, is I see members of the refugees, I see members of the prisoners, of their families, what their comments, what they say. In fact, 90% of their Facebook comments is related to their imprisoned family member. Whether we miss you, we remember you, we did something for you, I'm sad without you. I mean, I can tell you freely that 90% is on the prisoner issue.
And we're approaching our 4th week now of the Great Return March in Gaza, and we've again seen another weekend, another Friday of bloodshed and assassinations. And we call them assassinations because when your army raises mounds, uses bulldozers to raise mounds, so you have an elevated position over a civilian captive population, and you train your weapon upon that civilian population, and you shoot, whether they're a member of the press, as we saw, or an ambulance driver, or a child. This is cold-blooded murder. And we saw some very horrific images in the past week, in particular of a 12-year-old child who had his leg blown off. I mean, those that are on Facebook may have seen it. But what beggars belief is the callous mentality of the human being that can actually, level the crosshairs of a high-powered rifle.
This boy was not randomly hit.
No.
He was targeted.
Well, I mean, the Israeli army said on the first Friday, we know where every bullet landed, and we can account for every bullet, and every bullet got to where it was supposed to be. I mean,
a tweet that they deleted, but it reflects their...
This comes back to when you're saying it's an other. Yeah. Because he's there looking at a child that's not a child in his eyes. He's a terrorist.
Also, targeting children is systematic policy of the Israeli soldiers. And I want to make reference to Iman al-Hams in 2004. This schoolgirl on her way to school in Gaza, before the settlements in Gaza were disassembled, she was targeted, she was killed, and then the soldier approached her dead body and emptied his rifle.
To confirm the kill.
More than 30 bullets was shot on a dead child, dead schoolgirl, which reflects the type of...
He said he'd do it again too.
You're listening to Palestine Remembered on 855 AM on Radio 3CR.
So on Monday, Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network and the Australian Jewish Democratic Society held a joint event called A Stein for Palestine. And it was held in a local bar in Melbourne. And there was a Palestinian and an ex-Israeli, I'll call her an ex-Israeli, and a Palestinian via Lebanon. They all gave presentations and talks about their own experiences. But in particular, and we talked about the inhumanity of the indoctrination of Zionism and what that does with soldiers, that it can kill a 12-year-old or shoot somebody wearing a pressed vest or target an ambulance. But there are, in the truest sense of Judaism. There are many very good Jews, and a very, very good Jew in the truest sense of, the Old Testament and the belief in a one God, spoke about her personal journey from a kibbutz near Jenin and farming the land and seeing that the Palestinian workers weren't getting paid the same, and then working out that in fact those Palestinian workers that were in from a Jenin refugee camp were probably the original owners of this land, could no longer live in Israel, left, and I'll call her a post-Zionist. I'm not sure exactly what she calls herself. But today there are Jews, and we are talking now to Australian Jews. You don't need to be part of Zionism. You don't need to be. You can say, I can't have Israel represent me when 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank, 2 million in Gaza, 1 million of them in children, when those people wake up and are trapped and the amount of food that comes in, the calorific intake is calculated and determined preordained, the land, sea, air blockade, the 1.7 million Palestinians inside the state of Israel, the alleged equal citizens, you can say that doesn't represent me, it doesn't represent Judaism.
Not to mention the 8 million refugees who are denied return.
Yeah. So we're calling for those Jews to be true to their Judaism and not be Zionists, and call out this evil manifestation that has been created and disassociate themselves and join us in a boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign to make Israel comply with international law.
I think we should have a special mention to the ambulance and all the emergency workers in Gaza who are under continual fire. I mean, we know that the Israeli army will kill the press. They'll also shoot towards the medics. They're using an indescript gas on a lot of the civilian population. There's a lot of footage coming out of convulsions and all different reactions. And the fact that these guys don't get paid to do what they do, they are running into an area and knowing that they are under fire. So kudos to these guys. And,
absolutely.
They're complete volunteers.
Look, in Gaza, in West Bank, wherever there is confrontation with the Israeli army, there will be the Palestinian resistance, and there will be also the unknown soldiers. And these are the people like the paramedics, the
Nisreen Ameerah.
And of course, we will have to mention Nisreen Ameerah, who is a 19-year-old Palestinian refugee living in West Bank. She was, there was a footage of her in the middle of clashes between Palestinians and Israeli soldiers near the north of Ramallah in Al-Bire.
Soldiers were trying to stop her from getting to someone that was on the ground. Soldiers were intimidating her, pushing her, physically trying to remove her. And she said, I'm not going anywhere. What were the exact words that she said were pretty amazing.
She said, they hit me on my back, they hit me on my stomach, they hit me on my shoulders, and I did not leave the young guy. And she also said
they dare you to shoot me,
she
or
said,
you wouldn't.
She said, in the middle of that, and I told the soldiers as they were intimidating me with their weapons, فشرت عينك تاخذ وانا حية بدك تطخ.
Which is translated, I dare you. You think that I'll allow you to take him whilst I'm alive? If you want to shoot, shoot.
She also said, and I will say it in Arabic, quoting her, quoting Nisreen, كل حركاتهم بالبنادق لم تخفني وقتها ولم تجعلني أتراجع للحظة فهدف حماية الجريح وضعته نصب عيني لأن عملي ورسالتي الإنسانية أقوى من الجنود وأسلحتهم.
All their threatening actions with their rifles didn't scare me, and I won't back down, not for a moment. My humanitarian mission is bigger than their soldiers and their weapons.
So what can we say to Nisreen? And
this is a 19-year-old girl. So good luck Zionism defeating that.
This is the spirit, and
you never break that spirit.
People like Nisreen and the unknown soldiers and the paramedics deserves to be mentioned, and their work deserves to be acknowledged.
And, another commemoration, Yusuf, this is the 30th year, the 16th of April 1988, since Abu Jihad, Khalil Al-Wazir, was assassinated. He was Abu Ammar's, Yasser Arafat's number 2, deputy of the PLO, and an Israeli mission. They went into his home
in Tunisia,
in the middle of the night, and in front of his family, riddled his body with bullets.
So this was in Tunisia that this happened as well?
This is after 1982, and the PLO left Lebanon.
PLO left Lebanon to Tunisia, which is 3,000 miles away from Palestine, in a deal coordinated by the Americans after the 82 invasion of Lebanon. And the Tunisian authorities gave the Palestinian Liberation Organization a decade where they can stay until further notice. So from 82 to 92. And now during this time, several things happen in the Palestinian national struggle events. For example, the civil war in Lebanon was happening. But more importantly, the start-up of the First Intifada. The First Intifada was mostly orchestrated by this man. He was considered the architect of the First Intifada because while he did not start it, but Khalil Al-Wazir, Abu Jihad, was one of the spearheads where he gave the Intifada its momentum by coordinating, by mobilizing the troops on ground, and by also making sure that this is not a random response. This is going to lead into something more organized, something more sustainable, something that will have political agenda and end, something that can be translated into results. And like what they said, what he said, the resistance, Intifada seeds, and the politicians can harvest later into the future state of
he was
the
well loved and
Palestinian.
followed and respected
He
by
was
everybody.
he
Very
was
well
loved by all Palestinians. We're not talking political factions. While he belonged to Fatah, but he was not a Fatah figure only. I think all Palestinians feel represented by Khalil Al-Wazir and people like him, and this is why.
Is this why he was murdered?
His legacy, of course, he was so dangerous to the Israeli government.
It was dangerous
And I
because
remember-
the First Intifada, this is one of the momentous times that we took control of the agenda. You know, this is the first time that the Western world was looking at Palestinians sympathetically. Kids were getting shot at, bones broken by an illegal, oppressive occupier. And Khalil Abu Jihad was orchestrating this. And, you know, the reports are that he was working on a memo about the Intifada when they burst into his room. And we've got to remember, they put 70 bullets into his body. 70 bullets in front of his eldest son and in front of his wife. You know, we talk about Gaza today. The barbarity is, you know, well entrenched into Zionism and the evilness of their army.
You have to understand that before First Intifada, the Palestinian struggle was outside Palestine. So it was the first time since Naksa, or since Nakba basically, that the Palestinian regained the initiative and started something against occupation inside Palestine.
And they didn't know what to do, the Israelis.
And the Israelis were exposed before the world, and that's why even the later Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, the guy who was viewed like the man of peace, was the one who basically started the bones-breaking policy to crush the determination of young Palestinians protesting against occupation in West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. And there was famous footage of soldiers literally breaking the bones, literally breaking the bones of Palestinians
with rocks and rifle butts.
With rocks and rifle butts.
Bending arms backwards, exposing an elbow, and then, you know, breaking. I mean, it's just horrific footage.
Also, Nasser, as you may remember, the funeral of Abu Jihad was also an event itself, because he was killed, he was assassinated in Tunisia, and his will that he wanted to be buried in Palestine, but of course Israel refused that.
Of course.
And the second choice was he wanted to be buried in Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria. Now, back then, the relationship between PLO and Syria was very bad. And the Syrian authorities, while they could not say no to some big figure like Khalil Al-Wazir, I remember my relatives in Yarmouk camp talking to me about the funeral. It was the first time Yasser Arafat was allowed to go to Syria after the cutting the ties between the Syrian regime and the PLO of 1983. So it was the first time that Arafat was allowed to go to Yarmouk camp, and all Yarmouk camp took to street, including people who didn't have any form of involvement with politics. They just went to see Yasser Arafat, and they literally carried his car, as it walked, as it started entering Yarmouk. So it was an event itself, and unfortunately, with the fall of Yarmouk in the hands of either the wrong hands now, his grave was targeted by ISIS fighters, I heard last year. So this is a sad, a further pain to the pain.
A further pain to the pain. I wasn't sure I was going to share this story, but I remember when Abu Jihad died, my father was very, very close with Abu Jihad. In fact, closer with him than with Abu Ammar. And he didn't believe it. And he had Abu Jihad's house phone number. And he called and spoke to Intisar, Abu Jihad. And, the phone call would have cost hundreds of dollars then, because it's not such a simple thing to call from Australia to Tunis. And it was a normal thing for us to see Dad cry. And I say Dad cry in the sense of his pain for Palestine, whether it was, a massacre or a commemoration, or the perpetual assassination cycle that Israel and put us through. But this was, without question, his most pain day. And, it was a silent sob for our loss.
Well, God's mercy be upon the soul of Abu Jihad and your father and all Palestinians who died before Palestine was liberated.
We also lost a very famous Palestinian artist this past week, Jumana El Husseini. She was born in 1932 in Jerusalem, part of the Al Husseini family. She was a painter and sculptor. She lived in Paris, was taught and educated in Beirut, but she was really quite famous in her representation of women in sculpture, ceramics, and other paintings.
And she dedicated all her work to the Palestinian cause and basically to Jerusalem. So it's people like Jumana El Husseini, people like Reem Al-Banna, the Palestinian singer who passed away last month, people like Naji Al-Ali, the cartoonist who was also assassinated in London in 1987.
And people know him from Handala,
the icon.
Yeah.
And people like Ismail Shammout, and the list goes on. The Palestinian artists and the intellectuals are the spearhead of Arab literature and culture.
And finally, just as we're closing, Yusuf, a big shout out, our station manager, Michaela, her mother, Geordie, and partner, Thalia, came to our protest a couple of weeks ago and had heard us on the show, and they had plans for that Saturday, but they only found out about the protest from the show, and they're regular listeners. So Georgie and Thalia, thanks so much for listening, and thanks for coming into our protest.
It's beautiful.
And Michaela, you've got a great mum.
Okay, and this is where we have to end the show again for another week. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Thank you, Nasser. Thank you, Yusuf. And we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you, Robert. And until we meet next time, this is Nasser, Yusuf, and Robert wishing you the best of time and salam.
عن بلدي يحكيلي يا نسيم اللي مارق عالشجر مقابلي عن أهلي يحكالي عن بيتي يحكالي عن جار الطفولة حكاية طويلة احكيلي احكيلي يا نسيم اللي مارق عأرض الغار حلفتك تجي تلعب عند بغار